You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. On this edition of Encore, we're looking back at Breaking the Blue Ceiling, originally introduced live on December 9th of 2020. As part of Women's History Month, we invite you to take a listen to this high-profile panel of women and men in law enforcement to discuss the challenges of the recruitment of female officers and the unique experiences that women face in their roles to serve and protect. This is a three-part series, with part one beginning with opening remarks by the Memorial Fund's CEO, Marcia Ferranto, and keynote speaker, Senator Maggie Hassan, followed by individual introductions from each panelist. The program was moderated by then-director of the ATF, Regina Lombardo, and panelists James Dinkins, President, Thomson Reuters Special Services, Chief Melissa R. Hyatt, Baltimore County Police, Maryland, Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, Philadelphia Police Department, Pennsylvania, Linda Williams, then President of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, and Chief Kristen Zeman, Aurora Police Department, Illinois. And now for part one of Breaking the Blue Ceiling.
Good afternoon. I am Marcia Ferranto, CEO of the National Law Enforcement Memorial Museum. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our panelists for participating in this important subject matter discussion. We believe that not only will women in law enforcement benefit from today's panel, but law enforcement leadership all around the country will benefit as well. Today's program is being sponsored by Thomson Reuters, who continues to fund important topics like today's program. Special thanks to Thomson Reuters for always being ready to support our men and women in blue through our programs here at the National Law Enforcement Museum. Their support can be linked directly to our many success stories. At the National Law Enforcement Museum, when we create program topics, we like to keep in mind historical relevance of the subject matter. Recognizing the significant role that women have played throughout history is important to all of us. The discussion around how to better attract, retain, and advance women in law enforcement is a subject every law enforcement leader should be interested in learning more about. We have brought together a panel of experts and seasoned professionals to share their experiences and offer suggestions on best practices as it pertains to women in law enforcement across the country. I would like to introduce our keynote speaker today, the Honorable Maggie Hassan. Before being elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016, Senator Hassan previously served as a state senator and a governor of New Hampshire. She is only the second woman in American history to be elected as both a governor and a U.S. senator. Her top priority is working to keep Americans safe, secure, and free. And she is working to ensure that local law enforcement has the resources needed to keep our community safe. Senator Hassan worked to ensure significant federal funding for police and fire departments across the state and helped pay for necessary equipment and additional staff. As our country continues to grapple with the substance misuse crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, Senator Hassan is also focused on making sure that those on the front lines receive the support they need to improve their mental and physical health. The senator has co-sponsored bipartisan legislation that is now law to establish suicide prevention programs for law enforcement. She also co-sponsored the Safeguarding America's First Responder Act, which helps ensure that families of first responders lost to COVID-19 receive line of duty benefits. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you so much, Marcia, for that wonderful introduction. It is so great to be with all of you today. And I just also want to thank our panelists and all of the officers joining today's discussion for your service and for working to keep our country safe. And please pass on my thanks to your family as well, because I know that none of you do this alone. Thank you as well to the National Law Enforcement Museum for hosting today's event. The museum does important work to share the stories, history, and experiences of American law enforcement. And I appreciate your mission to strengthen relationships between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. Providing this constructive dialogue is essential to helping tackle pressing challenges, including the one we are here today in this panel to discuss: attracting, retaining, and advancing women in law enforcement. Public safety is the most important task of any government. When you really think about it, those on the front lines of law enforcement are on the front lines of democracy. Our people, our families, and our economy cannot thrive without safe communities. As members of law enforcement do all that they can to keep people safe, it's important that the diversity of their communities are reflected within their ranks. This, of course, includes strengthening inclusion of women police officers, which benefits both officers and the communities that they serve. In policing, just as is true in other job fields, balanced representation matters. And when more women are included, we often find better outcomes. Women offer a key perspective and collaborate and communicate in ways that can be particularly useful in public safety. Research indicates that women officers are more likely to help de-escalate and diffuse confrontations with citizens. And women officers are often better communicators, which can help bolster trust and strengthen relationships between law enforcement and communities. Unfortunately, as everybody here today knows, women remain vastly underrepresented in police departments all across the country. Though we make up more than 50% of the population, women only account for roughly 13% of city and county police officers. And that number is even lower for state police organizations. We must understand why these disparities occur, and we have to find ways to break down barriers and provide greater inclusion for women in law enforcement. An overarching issue is that too often, especially in traditionally male-dominated fields, challenges facing women go overlooked and unaddressed. Even seemingly minor things can make a real difference. When I served as governor of New Hampshire, I heard about various uniform issues from female troopers. They ran into issues with boots, hats, belts, and equipment that just wasn't designed for them and didn't fit. And it just had never occurred to the men who were buying the uniforms that there were these differences that should be addressed. This is an issue I've been working on for our women in the military after hearing about the military uniforms for female cadets at West Point. As many of the officers watching today can attest, a properly fitting uniform is critical to your ability to perform your job effectively. For decades, however, uniform policies at West Point disadvantaged female cadets. For incoming cadets, the United States Military Academy issued a full set of gear, which included 5 sets of so-called unisex uniforms. On its face, this policy appeared to be gender neutral, but it was not that case when actually in effect. The unisex uniforms were still designed mostly for male bodies. And although a better fitting alternative existed, cadets had to pay for those uniforms, and they couldn't even get them until they were done with their initial 6-week cadet basic training. Unintentionally, this policy sent a message to female cadets that they're second-class citizens, and it threatened their ability to perform their daily operations. In October, following a letter that I wrote calling for these policies to be reviewed, the Secretary of the Army agreed to change the policy and provide incoming female cadets with better fitting uniforms. In a field that's been historically male-dominated, changes like these are critical to bolstering women's inclusion and helping them compete and thrive. And it's an example of the type of change that can be instituted to help eliminate barriers that hold women back. I know that women in law enforcement continue to face their own hurdles. To start, there are a number of challenges in recruiting women in a field where they have traditionally been underrepresented. It's important for women to see themselves in law enforcement and to have mentors and role models that they can look up to once they get there. It's welcome news that across the country, the number of women leading police departments has grown recently, And we're lucky to be joined by some of those leaders on today's panel. And while there's still a major disparity, I'm hopeful that this new leadership and rise in visibility will help more women realize that they too can take on these roles. But it's also clear that even when women are recruited to join the force, they often face barriers when they get there, and retaining them is a persistent challenge. Given the intense demands of this line of work, issues like childcare and family support can place real burdens on all law enforcement families. Shift work also becomes a real problem since there are no childcare facilities open from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., at least in most communities I know. And those burdens are particularly acute for women. Finding strategies to strengthen childcare and other family-friendly policies could pay dividends in recruiting more women officers. And by investing in them, we can help more women grow and be successful in these roles. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and I know that today's panel will provide an even greater perspective on the challenges and unique experiences facing women in law enforcement. Moving forward, I hope that if there are issues facing women in law enforcement, no matter how big or small, you will reach out to my office in case we can help. Many of these challenges are things you might not realize unless you are actually in the jobs. So I hope you will share your expertise and your perspective with me. And I look forward to working together on this issue and other ones. Throughout my time in office, I've worked to ensure that local law enforcement has the resources they need to keep communities safe. I've fought for additional federal funding for police departments to pay for necessary equipment and to hire additional staff. And I recognize the unprecedented risk facing law enforcement officers amid this pandemic. That's why, in addition to working to ensure that officers have the support and equipment that you all need, I've also co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to ensure that families of first responders lost to COVID-19 receive line of duty benefits. Moving forward, I hope that we can partner together on strategies to strengthen police departments all across the country, including in investing policies to attract women to this field and then to help them advance in it. I want to again thank today's panel, as well as the law enforcement officers watching today, for your service and sacrifice on behalf of communities and citizens all across our country. Thank you for being willing to protect people you don't know and to protect them simply because and always because they're Americans. And I thank you again to the National Law Enforcement Museum for hosting this important discussion. Please stay safe, everybody. Nice to be with you.
Senator, thank you so much for being with us. And I welcome you over to the museum once we open again and promised you a really great tour.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure thing. So it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, one of the people that were instrumental in making today's program happen, and that is Acting Director Regina Lombardo. Regina Lombardo is the first female acting director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Director Lombardo began her law enforcement career in 1992 as a special agent in the ATF Miami Field Division. Over the years, Director Lombardo has held many management positions, including but not limited to Assistant Director of the Office of Human Resources and Professional Development, Deputy Assistant Director of Field Operations, Central Region, Chief of ATF's Leadership Institute, and as Assistant ATF Country Attaché in Toronto, Canada. And she also holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Florida and is a member of several organizations, including Women in Federal Law Enforcement, the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives, the Florida Chiefs Association, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and Major City Chiefs Association. So, Director, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Marcia. I appreciate the introduction. And I know that it was probably about a year ago when we had this vision of possibly pulling together a power-packed event of women leaders around the country. So I know we've had a couple of hiccups with COVID, but I'm happy to see that we've been able to push through, become resilient, and find a different way to deliver. So I'm super excited today. So thank you for the introduction. And Senator, thank you for your comments. I have to say it's refreshing to hear the support for law enforcement from the Senate. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, especially with the panel that we've put together. It's what I call the Power Pack panel. We have definitely hit the mark by at least knowing that we did the right thing, because we have so many people that have joined today. I think we have about 1,000 participants. So that shows the large audience, shows that we're meeting the need. So we have an exceptional panel today, represented by the federal government, myself and a few others out there, and some former and retired federal employees and federal leaders. We also have some of our metropolitan law enforcement leaders, and you're going to hear from them today. So I'm excited about that. They're going to, what I call, happy to be able to share this table with me, to be able to talk about the things that we've spoken about and we've challenged and we've heard for what I call decades, myself 30 years almost in policing. So despite all of our efforts for many years, the panel as well, we've all had many hurdles that we have had to navigate through. And sometimes I refer to it as whitewater rafting through the journey of positions from start to where we are today. And so despite all of our efforts, we still, as the senator said, we still remain pretty stagnant in our community as representation for women in law enforcement. We hear statistics and numbers, and the senator was correct by saying it's usually hovers around 13% across the country. And so what we'd like to do is try to figure out and have a deeper dive conversation today to see if, what are the hurdles and how do we really overcome those. So I'm super excited to hear and listen to the panel members. So I'm going to do what I call a bottom line up front topic of each of the panel members. And then I think that the best way sometimes to do it is not reading bios, because I think hearing from each of them, you'll probably get a better connection, a better feel for who they are, what they represent, some about their leadership style. And so today we have a panel. Melissa Hyatt is the chief of the Baltimore County Police Department. I know she's first to hold that position. Super proud to hear that she's sitting in that seat right now. I did read an article about her called Beyond the Badge, which was great. And so I think, Melissa, if you wouldn't mind just kicking it off a little bit and sharing a little bit about who you are, who you represent. And then we'll go around through the other panel members to introduce themselves and share maybe 3 to 5 minutes of what you'd like the audience to hear. And then we'll get a deep dive discussion on the 3 themes we talked about, and I'll hit you up with a couple good hot topics and a couple good questions. Melissa?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I'm Melissa Hyatt. I'm the chief of the Baltimore County Police Department, and I've been in my role for about 1.5 years. I grew up in a police family with my father serving for 31 years in the Baltimore City Police Department, where I ultimately followed his footsteps. I wanted to be a police officer ever since I was very young. I served for a little bit over 20 years in the Baltimore City Police Department and ultimately retired from there at the rank of colonel to accept a position as vice president for security for Johns Hopkins Medicine and Johns Hopkins University. Although I really enjoyed that role at Johns Hopkins and the challenges that were associated with global security, I really missed law enforcement. And when the Baltimore County Police Department began their search for a new chief, I applied for the position. I grew up in Baltimore County and I still actually have roots here, so it was a really good fit for me. My journey, my career journey as it pertains to our discussion today, has always been a somewhat non-traditional career path. My assignments over the years kept me on the street, and I served on and later supervised several operations squads, operating in high crime areas. I also served on my police department SWAT team for about 7 years, first as an officer and then later returning as a sergeant and a team leader. Eventually, I ultimately became responsible for planning and serving as incident commander for all large-scale events and major incidents in Baltimore City, from things like the Baltimore Marathon and Fleet Week to sizable protests and things like the civil unrest in 2015. I spent time in the police department as chief of staff to the police commissioner and later served as our police department's chief of patrol. Just a little bit about me and my leadership style. My style is based on my own experience. And over the course of my career, I've done the job of a police officer on every level. And I feel that I understand the importance of really embracing my people. It's important to have empathy and to appreciate the folks that are out there every day doing the job. And they're often doing it in some pretty challenging circumstances right now. I support a participatory environment when the circumstances allow. And really, from my perspective, I have employees in my organization that are going to be here for 25 or 30 years. But as a chief, I'm only going to be here for a portion of that time. I want my team to feel like their input matters and that this is their police department and they want them to be proud to work here. Their buy-in, particularly during these current times in our profession, makes organizational change or progress easier to move forward. I take the responsibility of developing my team very seriously, and one of my personal goals is that the next chief for Baltimore County comes from within our ranks. And lastly, in terms of my leadership style, I'll say this, that when decisions need to be made, or if we're in a crisis, I am decisive and take full responsibility for every decision that I make for the organization. I'm going to briefly tell you a little bit about my outstanding organization, which, by the way, is hiring and is a great place to call home if anyone's considering a career in law enforcement. We're the primary law enforcement agency in a county that spans 612 square miles with an additional 28 square miles of water. We serve a population of 847,000 people. My strength is 2,600 people, which includes my civilian staff. And I'm proud to say that we have 17% of our police officers who are females, which, although it's above the national average, is something that we really aim to improve on during the upcoming years. One of my goals as chief is to increase diversity, both at the entry level and throughout the ranks, including in our leadership roles. And I really couldn't be prouder to lead this department and the men and women that work here. I'll conclude by saying this profession, law enforcement, just has so much to offer. And I've experienced it firsthand with a variety of incredible assignments and opportunities over many years. Most of the positions that I've held during my tenure have been extremely challenging, some of them physically challenging, others arduous in other ways. And certainly some of them have been more welcoming than others. There are times that people have tried to tell me what I could do and what I couldn't do. And like everyone else on this panel, people have at times put up barriers. But for me, limitations will only be self-imposed, and people putting up obstacles has only made me work harder to accomplish my goals. I feel fortunate because there were women in law enforcement long before I got here that fought battles, so I didn't have to fight them. And I really hope that the professional path that I've chosen ultimately helps pave the way for others, like maybe the next female SWAT team leader or chief of patrol in a major police department. Thank you.
Well, that was quite the introduction. I just want to say I appreciate sharing the fact that maybe you're one of the organizations that are getting it right. Why we look at trying to do better in recruitment, especially for promotions for women and advancements in their career. So thank you for sharing your story. I'd love to hear next from Commissioner Danielle Outlaw. I know that you started your career as in Oakland, I think, Oakland, California, and rose through the ranks there. But then you broke some ceilings in Portland, and now I see you're in a great position in Philadelphia. So I'm sure you have your challenges, but I would love to hear a little bit about you. Share with the audience maybe a little bit about your agency, but also about you and your leadership style.
Sure. And, thank you, Director Lombardo, for the introduction. I am not going to be as thorough as Chief Hyatt. And look, Chief Hyatt, you got your blouse coat on. I missed the memo, but she's always sharp. She's always sharp. With that said, I have had the opportunity to lead the Philadelphia Police Department. It's the fourth largest police department here in the country since February of this year. Prior to my arrival here, I was the chief of police in Portland, Oregon for 2 years. And I left my police department where I'd actually grown up, which was the Oakland Police Department. That's where I'm from, Oakland, California. I left there after 20 years of service. So going backwards, I've now been at 3 different agencies and pretty much have been a first in every executive role that I've had here. But unlike Chief Hyatt, I don't have the law enforcement background. While there was some military in my family, the difference in my household or in my family, which is a very large family, was that we didn't have any law enforcement in our inner circles. And quite frankly, when I was younger, my interactions with police were far different. And that we were told when we were younger, when you see the police, you run. We weren't doing anything that caused us to run or required us to run, but there just wasn't that trusting relationship because of what we'd seen in our own interactions and lived experiences with the police, and myself personally, having personally experienced loved ones. As a young child, my perception was you took someone I cared about and loved away. And so it took some time to actually build a trusting relationship with the police department. And that didn't happen until high school for me, when I was actually dared to do a program. It was like a 2-week internship with the Oakland Police Department. And I signed up for it. I was dared to do it. I signed up for it. They selected me to do it. And I'm actually glad that I did, because it was at that time that I had an actual positive interaction with an officer who was assigned to me. His name was Tim Sanchez. I've told this story before, but I shadowed him for 2 weeks, and I had the opportunity to not only shadow him on patrol, but also to shadow some other officers inside of the police department as well. And at the conclusion of those 2 weeks, they offered the opportunity for me to apply for the Explorer program. And that's what really allowed me to see human beings behind these uniforms and learn even more that they were a lot like me, in addition to Officer Sanchez, but they're a lot like me and my family. And that they did have our best interests at heart, given that I was a community member and a lot of them were from the Oakland community as well. So once I graduated from high school, they let me know that, hey, we have this program called the Police Cadet Program. It's kind of like the Explorer program, except now you get paid. And at this time, as a college student, I was the first one in my family to go to college. They said you get paid $10 an hour. It might have been a little bit more than that. And at that point, I thought I was rich because I wasn't making that much money at that time. But not only do I get this cool uniform, and I get $10 an hour while I'm a student, and I get these cool assignments out and about in the field. Again, getting to know more about my community that I had already thought I'd known so much about, but also at the same time learning the inner workings and actually kind of being ingrained in the culture of the police department there. And then, like many others, life hit my last semester of undergrad, and I learned that I would soon become, well, in 9 months, I would become a single mother. And it was at that time I needed to get my life together and figure out what I was going to do. I thought that I was going to go straight through and get a doctorate, become a social psychologist. I would argue that I'm still a social psychologist, just without the degree. But I needed to make a decision at that point because I wanted to be able to take care of my son without the stigma of aid and all those other things. So when my son a couple of weeks old, I took the physical agility test to become a police officer and passed it. I had no business out there, but the things that you do when you're determined, that we do as when we're determined and we want to take care of our children. But I went through the police academy with a newborn, and pretty much the police department had their claws in me from day one. Once I became ingrained in that culture and became a police explorer and had the opportunity to see the other side. So quite frankly, had I not had those positive interactions, had I not had the opportunity to see officers and civilians alike outside of their uniform or in a different light, I know I wouldn't be sitting here today as a police commissioner, but I know that I wouldn't see police in the same light because I never had the opportunity to have positive interactions or opportunities for fellowship with sworn law enforcement. So, I just continued on to just want to take the jobs that no one else wanted. When I was actually, my shoulder would get tapped to do stuff that nobody else wanted, and I would never say no. And I found that made me not only well-rounded, but it gave me more of a 20,000 foot view of the organization, not just a viewpoint of what was ahead of me. So because of that, I'm now looking at things from a different lens, from a more strategic lens. And I would think that I can confidently say that I learned big picture as it relates to running a police department a lot earlier on in my career. I'd also add that my leadership style, like Chief Hyatt, my leadership style, I think, has been developed over the years based off of what works for me and what really drove me nuts under someone else's leadership. So it's not any one particular thing, but I can say that I've kind of taken from many people, whether it's previous mentors, informal mentors, or previous chiefs of police, direct supervisors, and also just seeing as an observer how others interact with their leadership. And quite frankly, I think if you ask anybody, whether it's union leadership here in my previous departments or ask my previous supervisors, if you ask them about me, they'll say that I'm fair, but I'm on my stuff. I'm using, nice words. I'm on my stuff, but then I'm also consistent and that I like to relate to people. So for me, I find that being authentic, that's the only thing I know how to do, but I think that's the best thing to do. And I always ask questions. I don't let someone guilt me or make me think that I'm less than or that I'm weak if I have a question about something. And then I'm unapologetic in what I do. I've gone for a long time in my career working behind a curtain, or, not always having a seat at the table to speak out and have a voice. And I'm very clear now that because I do have a seat at the table, that it's important for me to not only use my voice, but be unapologetic when I might have a dissenting opinion or something, or it's unpopular or whatever it is, or if I have a question, or if I slow the train down, or whatever it is that might make people in the room uncomfortable. You do it, again, confidently. And that's pretty much described, I think, my leadership style. In addition to, of course, being decisive when need to be and very collaborative when we have time to do so. And I think that works well. Being an outsider coming into a new department, without people having the advantage of knowing who you are and growing up in the department with you, it takes some time for them to get to know you. And the more people you have, obviously, the more time it's going to take. And in a pandemic, that might take longer. But I can honestly say, I think when people walk away from meeting me and interacting and working with me, those are the things that they'll tell you. And I'll leave it at that. I think we have plenty of time to cover more in our questions and answers. Thank you for the time for the intro.
So it's the beauty of the panel is to hearing your different, what I call your storyline, your walk of life, that from the beginnings of becoming, an officer on the street to where you are today. And I say you should be proud, because I know that Philadelphia is the fourth largest in the country police department, and you have large responsibility. And I would imagine going through your journey has probably made you the person that you are today, to be able to make those tough calls, tough decisions. And again, using your voice, as you said, is something that I think we all tell people, don't question your ability to lead. And so obviously you've been able to master that. So thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
Let's hear from Chief Kristen Zeman from the Aurora Police Department. I know you were born and raised in Aurora, and I think that you started your career in Aurora to lead the men and women in your ranks. What I know about you is you are an avid writer. You're a big supporter of the Blue Courage philosophy. And I know that right now you are leading the men and women of Aurora Police Department, and you work quite well with ATF. So I want to say thank you for that, but we'd love to hear a little bit about you and your leadership style, and just a little bit about how you navigate through some of the challenges that you've had.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here among these powerhouse girl power. I appreciate it. Yes, my name is Kristen Zeman. I'm the chief of the second largest city in the state of Illinois, something to bring up at your next cocktail party. Everyone knows Chicago in Illinois, but not necessarily anything else. So my agency has 450 personnel. That includes our sworn and civilian officers. And yes, I have grown up in my department. I graduated from high school 17 years old in June, and I started as a police cadet in July. So to say that I've grown up is both literal and figurative in my department. I hear a common theme here, like Chief Hyatt. I wanted to be a police officer since as far back as I can remember. My father was a police officer, and it didn't occur to me until I got older and understood what drew me to the profession. But it was many times during my childhood, maybe, 8, 10 years old, my dad saying, stay in the car, don't move. And this was our, family station wagon. And I stayed there and watched him run and grab people out of a burning car. One day I saw him wrestle the keys away from a drunk driver who had just hit a toll booth. And I remember sitting in the car and looking at all the other cars whizzing by, and my dad was running towards things. And I thought, okay, so that's what cops do. So very early on, the profession of service was instilled in me from him. And I sat back and watched, and I never wanted to do anything else. But interestingly enough, when I walked into my police department, in 1991, there were no females of rank. Even if it being over 300 sworn, there were no females. So when you don't see possibility, you don't know what you don't know. So it never occurred to me that I would ever move up in my organization. And it wasn't until the first female sergeant was promoted did I finally look and say, wow, that is a possibility. But interestingly enough, I shied away from being the only female. I was the only female that came on with my group of cadets, and I wanted to be one of the guys. And it took me a really long time in my career to embrace the difference, to embrace my authenticity. And so that was probably the biggest lesson that I had to learn, and then relearn, and then continue to learn again. I call myself remedial because I just tried to fit in, and we talked about authenticity, but it took me a while to understand fitting in versus belonging, and that we should never try to fit in, but we should try to belong without losing our sense of self. So I moved up, I promoted to sergeant, but there had never been a female female lieutenant in our ranks. And it was that same moment that I had where, even though I didn't see possibility, I had this little moment inside my head, and we all actually tackle that voice. It's that voice that says, oh, why me? And especially as females, I'd had 5 years on as a sergeant. I had already completed my bachelor's degree. I was working on a master's degree. And yet I still thought that, oh no, there are so many boxes I have to check. I have to go do this, this, and this. And I remember thinking, as I talked to some of my colleagues who were men, asking each other, hey, are you going to take the sergeant's exam or the lieutenant's exam? And all of the guys and, 42 sergeants were like, yeah, of course we are. And I thought, man, they're not even second guessing themselves. They're just going to do it. And I thought, and some of them can't even speak in complete sentences. So I thought, instead of that, why me? I had that little voice inside that kind of flipped and said, well, hold on, why not me? And so I decided to take the test, to go for the promotion. And I'm sure, like many of us on this panel, I have in my career have had what I call mentors and tormentors. And there were most certainly some barriers that I had to overcome in the form of some tormentors throughout my career. And one of them was my commander in my direct line of supervision that said, you will never become a lieutenant under my watch. And how crushing that was. And so I decided anyway to pursue it and to take the lieutenant's test. And it comprised of studying 5 books at the time. And I'll tell you what, I read those books. And then every time I got tired of reading, his face flashed in my mind. And then I read the books again. And then I read them a third time, and then dictated them on a tape recorder and listened to them in the shower and at the gym. And I ended up scoring number 1 on that list as a result of that. And I went on to become the first lieutenant, female lieutenant in our police department. And so the message there is very clear. And that is, if you learn to use criticism as fuel, you will never run out of energy. So I used that as fuel. And then I went on for several other firsts. I became the first female commander in my department and the first female chief. I have been chief of my organization. It will be 5 years in January. And it is the absolute honor of my life to have come up in this department and to serve the men and women of my organization who are magnificent and professional. And my philosophy is trying to pass on to them what it took me so long to learn, is just to bring yourself to work I have so many conversations with people who say, yeah, I'm not the same person at work as I am at home. And my response is, gosh, how exhausting that must be to try to remember who to be based on where you are. So since becoming chief, my first rule of leadership, what I've learned is that everything is your fault. You may not be responsible, but everything is your fault. I have also expressed that diversity of thought is one of the most important things to me in my organization. And the best idea wins. I don't care where that idea comes from. My philosophy also is community engagement. Community policing is not smoke and mirrors. It actually reduces crime if you practice it legitimately and without just using the buzzwords. And poor leadership is not rewarded. And that is, in my tenure, I had many people before me in my command level that were rewarded for keeping people down, AKA the tormentors. And so that is not rewarded. And furthermore, it's about accountability. I stand with my officers when they are right, and I part with them when they are wrong. And I make, under no certain terms, is that muddied? I've terminated 5 people in my tenure, and that has been the result. I should say they have terminated themselves. I think that it's also easy to sit on the sidelines. I'm looking for problem solvers. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and complain about something. So you've got to come at me with, if you've got a problem, you have to come at me with a solution. And finally, another style is communication versus notification. There is a time and a place for jump and how high. We had a mass shooting in February of 2019 where 5 people were killed and 5 of my officers were shot. In situations like that, there's no time, to communicate. That's a notification time. But for the most part, I find that when you lead an organization, if you spend more time communication on the front end versus notification, that actually it creates that buy-in in the end. And finally, I believe that passion persuades people. I am passionate about policing. I'm passionate about our officers. I'm passionate about what policing can be when we are at our very best. And right now we are at a valley within the peaks and valleys of law enforcement, and we've seen them over time. And I know that pendulum will shift, but we have to continue to earn that back. And so I'm also passionate about bringing more diversity into our ranks so we represent the people we serve. And I think that will get us kicked off, but that's a little bit of who I am.
I always love your passion when you speak, and I love listening to you and your ability to kind of keep things light and also make purposeful remarks. So thank you, Kristen. I know that we have a great partnership with ATF out in Illinois, and I want to thank you for that personally, and for the work that you do to empower and continue to look for the ways that we can really develop the women leaders in the country, but also bringing on new. So thank you for that. And now let's shift gears to the federal perspective. And I'd love to hear from Linda Williams, who's now the president of Noble. But prior to that, impressive career with the United States Secret Service. You started as a we call street agent, but I know you started out as a Secret Service agent for many years. And you have navigated what I call, again, whitewater rafting through the federal government, especially the Secret Service. To be the Assistant Director of Human Resources, Professional Development especially, but Human Resources, your workplace and workflow, that's a big responsibility. So share a little bit about you, who you are, a little bit about also the role that you play with Noble. And I'm looking forward to actually having some questions thrown at you as well. So Linda?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Director, and to the museum, to this wonderful panel of strong women. Again, I bring you greetings on behalf of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, Noble. Noble was founded in 1976 as a law enforcement organization. In 1976, we were in some tumultuous times, and even today, we still find ourselves navigating some of the same currents. Our creed is that we serve as the conscience of law enforcement by being committed to justice by action. And that's something that I take seriously as I became president in July. I had a 3-part agenda. gun violence, which I think needs no explanation. There was a national voting initiative, being an outstretcher of our communities. This election was like none before. So Noble provided the tools and the guidance for all of our communities and our constituents to have the ability to register, to vote, and to be prepared for that pivotal election. And the most important part is my 3-part agenda was the reimagining of public safety. What does that look like? I developed a task force that will serve as a roadmap. It's a 90-day project that will have its completion in January. And that report, I hope to socialize throughout the communities with our special interest group, but as well on the halls of Congress. Prior to becoming the national president, as you stated, I'm a 30-year veteran with the United States Secret Service. I've had the pleasure of serving since President Ronald Reagan until the president that we now serve. I started my career in 1988 as a uniformed officer with the Secret Service. 3 years later, I came over as a special agent, and I know we will get into that. Like so many on this panel, I served in the first in many positions, but even if I wasn't the first, I was just behind a couple others. And so again, the United States Secret Service has come a long way since I came as an agent in 1991. I retired as a deputy assistant director over the Office of Human Resources. And as you stated, that looks at the whole picture of the Secret Service, our outreach, our onboarding, our hiring, our retention, even the promotion potentials that is most important that we feed into our personnel that work in the organization. Today, I serve as a criminal justice professor at Middle Tennessee State University, my alma mater. They created a position called the Professor of Practice, where I give back to the very community that started it all for me. As I teach the young men and women, I've tried to prepare them for the world that's out there. My mantra is where reality meets academia. I teach them the textbook, but I give them real life stories, not only from my own portfolio, but even as I bring in subject matter experts. And my philosophy is simple, that, respect begets respect. I always believe that if you teach me, I can learn it. I always thought I was a unique person, and anybody that knows me, I say my name is Linda with a Y. My mom knew that I was going to be unique, but I always honed into that uniqueness. I never shrink, and never have I, and never will I, from the individual God created me to be. I think everybody has a special gift, and nobody can represent me better than me. So again, I've learned to adapt to the atmosphere, but I bring something to the table. I bring my own unique skill set, my own thought process, and that all of us are unique, and collaboratively, that's what makes a viable and a constructive organization, whether it's on whatever level of law enforcement. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it back on to you, because I think we'll cover a whole lot. But thank you for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you, Linda with a Y. I appreciate your giving us a little bit of a background of who you are, because I know that you have some difficult challenges and issues, even facing Noble today, and how we move forward in the 21st century ahead of us. So thank you for the work that you do. And so last but absolutely definitely not least, I'd like to introduce James Dinkins. Don't think I forgot about the male representation, and I'm looking forward to your perspective and your thoughts on retaining women as we get into some conversations. But I know that you're now the president of special services for Thomson Reuters, but prior to that, I think our relationship goes way back many years when you were federal government and you were the head of your, especially Customs and Border Protection, but Homeland Security investigator. I know that you have led the way and helped to retain and promote women in your career. So Jim, thank you for being on this panel. So feel free to share a little bit about your journey and where you are today with your company.
So, very good. Thank you. And I tell you, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to speak. And I know some folks are probably thinking, what is Jim Dinkins doing on the screen with all these strong, successful women? And I look at it as you're either part of the problem or part of the solution when we look at diversity and inclusion in the workforce. And so I've tried to be part of the solution. So my journey started back in Detroit, Michigan in the 80s when I was going to college. And luckily for me, like all of us, and I love to hear everybody's kind of journey in their lives and careers, because it's never what you expect and start out to accomplish and where you end up. I'm sure that the Chiefs never thought when they got out of bed that they would be the chief of the departments that are in today. And Regina, I'm sure you never thought when you started at ATF that one day you would lead the organization that you started within. So the journey is always very interesting. My journey started by luck, as I fell in love with criminal justice in college, not really knowing where I'd take that degree to, either local law enforcement, corporate security, or federal law enforcement. Our internship program at the University of Detroit found me an opportunity, and I interviewed for it. And actually, I was told no, as it become an internship program with U.S. Customs Service at that time. And then about 4 months later, somebody didn't pass their background investigation. Prior to weed being legalized in many places, they didn't pass their background investigation. So I ended up getting a call back and asking me if I could start right away in Washington, D.C. in an intern program. That was 1985. And then over 28 years later, with that same agency and its predecessor agency, as after 9/11 and Department of Homeland Security was created, I served as a special agent, originally with Customs, and then ultimately retired after serving in nearly every level of position within the organization, from management, from a special agent to senior special agent to a group supervisor to assistant special agent in charge, headquarters tours at different levels, unit chief, acting assistant director, to 2 offices where I served as a special agent in charge in both Baltimore as well as Washington, D.C. and Virginia. And then ultimately, the last 4.5 years of my career, I spent as the head of Homeland Security Investigations before retiring in 2014 and joining Thomson Reuters Special Services, where I'm the president today. And many of the law enforcement community is our customers. We provide unique content, analytical solutions, and data scientists to federal law enforcement, DOD, the intel community, as well as a few corporations that are major and large domestically and internationally. But my journey in law enforcement really enlightened me along the way about how the diversity within your organization, especially starting out in San Francisco, where we had a very diverse workforce, but along the way, looking across the table and really noticing through the years a slight increase, steady increase of the number of fellow women in serving alongside of my offices. And I was really surprised when we saw the high watermark as that continuously grow to maybe around 16%, to then start falling off. And as all of you have pointed out, and everybody's pointed out, the benefits and power of diversity and what a woman can bring to the workforce is so impactful for, not only within the department, but then the people that we serve in law enforcement in that mission. And so it's many, I did not have to go over the hurdles and overcome the hurdles that all of you do, and all the women that are serving in law enforcement today. And hopefully we knock down some of those hurdles as we go forward. So that's why I'm really excited about being on this panel, is to talk about how we can attract and retain, and then not just mentor, but also to sponsor folks to move up within law enforcement ranks, and create a more diverse workforce, both from, like the great work that Noble's doing, but also as well as bringing in diversity when it comes to gender. So really happy to be on the panel and really look forward to our discussion. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective for sure. I know you're such an advocate, so it's nice to hear that you still are.
Thank you for tuning in to this revisit of Breaking the Blue Ceiling, where we heard from our panelists and their work involving the advancement of women in law enforcement. Join us next time on March 8th for part 2 as the discussion begins with some of the difficulties women had to face and overcome upon entering the law enforcement profession. For more information on this program, follow the link in the episode description. A special thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Encore, a series from the Precinct 444 podcast network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. We hope you learned something from this episode of Encore and will join us again on March 8th for part 2 of this special revisit of Breaking the Blue Ceiling. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.